Welcome guests, and thanks for participating in today's Metro Vancouver Facebook Live event. My name is Karin England. I am a garden enthusiast myself. I am trained as a landscape architect and I work as a park planner with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. Today's half-hour session is part one of a three-part series that we're going to be doing on gardening. There'll be a different event each week for the next 3 weeks. I have been invited here today to host a discussion about food gardening, which is a hot topic right now. And I'll give you a bit of information also about the Grow Green Guide, which is a web-based resource that was developed collaboratively with Metro Vancouver and the UBC Botanical Garden. Before going any further, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land that we live on is the shared ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish First Nations. For me personally, as someone who tends a garden, I'm very grateful for the examples set by Indigenous peoples of how to live with a deep connection of the land. So let's start by taking a look at the Grow Green website. I'm going to share my screen with you. I believe I'm going to share my screen with you. Hang on. So this is the Grow Green website, Grow Green Red website. It's got resources that are suitable for people who are growing in the Metro Vancouver region. It has information on how to grow an eco-friendly lawn, garden, and food, regardless of your skill set or the kind of space that you have. It's pretty flexible. You can see we've got design information here. We've got information about plants, and we've got some fantastic resources with a blog post from local experts on topics of interest in our region. So let's try and use this tool, and let's imagine that we're someone who is interested in growing food, assuming that the people that are with us today are interested in growing food. There's a questionnaire here that you can go through. It asks you a series of questions. So the first question is, what are your priorities? Do you want to support native plants or support pollinators? Let's say that we want to support, hang on, I just want to make sure that I've got something right here. Yeah, the first question should be, what kind of garden do you want to grow? So we want to grow food. And then it should ask us, would you like your garden, your food garden, to support native plants or support pollinators? So Tara, who is going to be our guest today, and I, we are both mad about bees, so we're going to support pollinators. Describe your garden space. Do you grow in containers or do you grow on the ground in a garden bed? So let's say that we grow in containers. It'll ask you how much sun you get. So we're going to say that we get a fair amount of sun. And you can see that what it's done now is it has gone through the website and it's found all of the designs that meet those specific criteria. It's got pictures of all the designs that meet those criteria. If you see one that you like, you can select it. And it takes you to this page, which is a free downloadable PDF that gives you all the information you need to create and care for this particular container. So there's a plan view, there's a labeled picture, there's a list of the plants that are included in the design and how many you need to buy. And it tells you how to maintain your container for best results. This is fantastic. Yes, I hope that you're all excited. This is a really great resource. Let's say that you wanted to go about this differently. Instead of going through the questionnaire, let's say you knew that you really wanted to grow, for example, kale. You can go to the Pick a Plant tool and you can tell it to search for kale. We've got two kinds of kale that we recommend. Let's just, for argument's sake, choose the first one and ask for more information about it. It's gone through our database and it has selected the designs that we have pre-generated that contain kale. And same as before, if you click on the picture, it will give you a free downloadable plan that tells you everything you need to build and care for this particular planter. So the idea is that you can take this PDF, you can print it off, you can take it with you to the garden center, and you'll have everything that you need in your hand. So you could go to someone and say, I want to do this, and they could get you all the things that you need. That's the plan. So we also have some resources. If you go to the resources link, you can see we've got practical advice from experts and tips for the green gardener. Sometimes people send us questions and we answer the questions that people send in. And of course, you are most welcome to join our mailing list so that you get news and updates about the Grow Green project. So that is some information about the Grow Green website. Fantastic free resource that you can access to help you learn how to garden in a more sustainable way. So my screen share should be closed now. And I would like to now move on to our Q&A part of our program today. I am very excited to introduce to you our guest for today. She is someone who knows a lot about plants and a lot about food gardening. It is the lovely and talented Dr. Tara Moreau from the UBC Botanical Garden. Welcome to our Facebook Live event, Tara.
Hi, Karin. Thanks for having me.
So the way this is going to work is I have some questions that I would like to ask you.
Okay.
And we can chat. And while we're doing that, people who are watching on Facebook Live can send us questions. And we will answer some questions as we go along. How does that sound to you?
That sounds fabulous.
Fabulous. Hey, Tara, my first question for you is, someone who's spent most of their professional career thinking about food and food systems, why are you so passionate about growing food?
Why am I passionate about growing food? Well, I didn't start, my love of growing things started really with my love of nature and growing houseplants. I got really passionate about houseplants, hadn't really learned very much about food, and then I really delved into growing potatoes. And it was just such a great way to connect with plants, and I became hooked. And I think that growing food gardens is such a great way for people to get outdoors and to be connecting to nature and to be learning about agriculture and a little bit about how difficult it can be to grow plants and how rewarding it can be. And I think it's just a great way for people to enter and think about our food system and agriculture globally.
I'm curious. I'm going to have to ask you one day when we're next get together about why you picked potatoes to start with. But in the meantime, let's say that I'm someone now who's interested in growing food. I haven't had any experience before. What do I need to get started? What kind of tools and supplies do I need?
So the main thing I always sort of bring up when we're talking about someone who's really new to food gardening is location. Location, location, location. You really want to think about what light you have. Are you going to grow indoors and outdoors? And so it's similar to that. The quiz that's on Grow Green is you depending on your location, the plants that you grow will vary. And so once you kind of have a sense of your location, for example, in my house, I don't have a lot of access to outdoor sunny spaces. And to grow food in particular, you want a significant amount of light. So definitely thinking about your location. And then you're thinking about, am I growing in soil, in the ground, if I have a lawn or a community garden, or am I growing in containers? And so all of these different elements will help guide you to figure out what you should be considering when you're growing. Light, access to water is really important. Water is really heavy, and in the peak of summer, your plants are going to require, food plants in particular, might require significant amounts of water. So you want to have an access to water nearby.
So access to water, access to sunlight. Are there, let's say I have a shady spot on a balcony. Are there any food plants that will grow in the shade? I don't want to discourage people who don't have access to full sun. Is there anything?
You can definitely grow, and you can grow some lettuce. There's lots of different options that you could do. I think it's really about being creative and a bit through trial and error too, to find what you can grow in your site in particular. And I think the key thing for new entrants to gardening is we're always learning. I've been exploring food gardens for over 15 years, and I'm learning every day new things, learning from friends and colleagues about how to grow better. So it's the more you learn, the more you realize that there's more to learn.
Right. Have you ever had any luck growing stuff inside your house under grow lights even? I know some people start seeds that way.
Yeah, people do that, and we've done that. We've done that in schools and school gardens. I think that's a great way to get started on your season, to grow indoors. Right now, here we are midway through May. I think, if there's certain warm season plants like tomatoes, for example, you might not necessarily want to start them by seed because it might be a little bit slow, but tomatoes you might buy as small little seedlings to get started.
Okay. We have a question from one of our viewers, which is actually something else I was going to ask you too. What do you need to consider when getting soil for potting your garden bed? Someone has asked particularly about where they can get good compost and good soil.
So, and I think the soil really depends. And I think that's just, I always say the foundation of sustainable food systems is healthy soil. Now that's slightly different. If you're growing outdoors and in an outdoor garden, you're going to likely be using terrestrial soil. If you're growing in containers, you're using potting soil. And actually, and that's potting soil is actually kind of a soilless medium. There's not a lot of true soil in potting soil. So those considerations have to come into play, where you can get, and compost can be added to both. It can be added to potting soil and to terrestrial soil, and finding and where you can get that. It depends a bit on where you are in Metro Vancouver. Garden services and shops are considered essential services right now. So there's some that are open. There's many that are coming online. So it depends on where you are in Metro Vancouver. You might just want to search up what is local to you.
Okay. The same question from the same person is, where can you find organic seeds to sow? Maybe we'll cover that in just a minute, because I know we were going to talk a little bit about seeds and where to do some creative getting around having to buy seeds. How do you decide what plants you want to grow?
So what plants you want to grow, I always start with, what do you want to eat? What does your family want to eat? Do you love to grow and eat kale? A lot of people start growing things, and it's a wonderful way to introduce kids to new vegetables. So it doesn't mean that just because you don't eat kale, you can't grow kale. But I think it's really rewarding to start with something that you're excited to eat. Wonderful way to introduce your kids to new vegetables and fruits. For me, I always kind of make my selection. I'm like, oh, this year I really want to try peas, or I really want to try something new. So you might develop that there's some staple things that you become really good at growing, and you want to grow them year after year. And I always encourage you to try something new and introduce it to your family, and see if you can grow some new plants.
So I like that approach, because I think you're more likely, especially as kids, to be excited about eating vegetables if you've grown them yourself and you get involved with the whole process. That's good advice. Where can you get seeds? So I guess some of the seeds that I grow, I buy from a seed catalog, and I can't wait in the winter for the first seed catalog to come, and I dream of spring. It's like early spring for me. I love pouring through the seed catalogs. Someone is asking particularly about organic seed suppliers. Now, I order my seeds mostly from West Coast Seeds, and I know they have a line of organic seeds. Do you have a place where you source your organic seeds from?
Yeah, there's a few. There's some really great local examples. So West Coast Seeds. There's others on the island too. So I think I just want to talk a little bit about the seed catalog, because in some ways that is like sometimes all you need to grow, because seed catalogs, we can take the West Coast seed catalog, for example, it gives you all the details about how to grow those specific plants, how to maintain them over the season, when to harvest them. But in right now, due to our current situation, accessing seeds, I know that there's been a bit of a delay on seeds. And so while we're talking about seeds, I was just going to sort of talk a little bit about how I've been getting creative, because I don't have a lot of seeds. Even though I work at UBC Botanical Garden, all my seeds are at the garden, all my supplies are there. So I've gotten really creative with what I have in my house. And I kind of call it my cupboard or my fridge botany. So I've been growing, for example, and these are some lettuce, the ends of a romaine lettuce that I snipped and that are growing back. I just placed them in water and on my windowsill. But in terms of seeds, the fun I've been having is in my bean cupboard. And I went into my dry beans, and I basically, I started these 2 days ago. We have fava beans. I'm sprouting my lentils, and I also have chickpeas. So, seeds can come not always just from the seed catalog. You can also, there's some amazing local seed libraries, there's seed exchange networks. You can save certain seeds year after year. So you can get creative. You can go and buy dried beans in the grocery store and plant some of those up. And the other one I was going to show you was my leek plant. I made leek soup a few weeks ago. I've been cooking a lot because we have more time, and I've been really trying to learn some new recipes and cook some plant-based diets. And this leek was cut right down, and I was going to put it in the compost, and we put it in water, and 3 weeks later, it's now regrowing.
I did a similar thing with like a green onion. And look at that. Like that's a couple weeks ago, and I've got more green onions.
Yeah, and they're amazing. And it's not going to grow as big as it's not going to regrow to its original leek size, but it's so rewarding to just nurture plants and to have fun with plants. And if you have a family, to learn about plants through just regrowing bits of it. So while it might not produce as much as a traditional leek would in your garden, these are just simple ways that you can get growing and get started at home when you have very few supplies.
We've got a question from Facebook here. Someone has got problems with slugs eating leaves of their plants. And I think that there are some plants, is it true? You could tell me this, Tara, that leeks don't get attacked by slugs as badly as more leafy lettuce or spinach. How can you plan your food garden to be less affected by slugs, or how can you control slugs if you've got them?
Well, slugs are like humans, right? They have preferences of which species of plants they might like to eat more than others. And so I think you can think about considering what plants to bring in. Frankly, slugs are kind of go hand in hand with gardens. So once you have them, what we do at UBC Botanical Garden is early in the mornings, our head gardener, Linda, she collects them in a bucket and will collect them, and sometimes many, potentially hundreds of them, and remove them from the food garden. So hand picking in the morning before it gets too hot and they go hide and seek shelter is a good way to clear out slugs from your garden. It's also a wonderful time to just be in the garden in the morning and looking at things and having a quiet moment.
We've got another question that maybe ties together with that about companion planting. I've read the books, Garlic, Slug, Tomato, and the companion planting books, and sometimes there are strategies for avoiding one species will repel the pest that attacks another plant. The question has to do with how close the companion planting has to be typically.
So you wanted to know, I'm going to go back to the beginning because you wanted to know about potatoes, and actually how I started growing potatoes was I was doing research in Nova Scotia comparing different methods of companion planting. So I was really sort of focused a lot of my early research on evaluating how insects truly respond to companion planting. And I will say for the bug that I studied, it's not here in Metro Vancouver, it was the Colorado potato beetle, my companion plants did not work. And at times, actually, it seemed like the companion plants were attracting more of my pest than repelling. And so I think there is some evidence of intercropping species and having impacts on pests. Some of the companion planting literature, I would say, is based on folklore. And so it's very difficult. I think in order to, I struggled with these questions around companion planting, how many to put in, and so I think it's a bit of a it's got a lot of people talk about companion planting, but there's not a lot of scientific evidence that it's incredibly effective.
Oh, that's news to me. Thank you, Tara. Is there any source that you think is credible, or is it all very science journal-y?
It's a little bit science journal-y. I think there's something, for me, I love intercropping. I think, what we talk about at UBC Botanical Garden, these, the thinking about diversity, and diversity is a really great piece. I would say, in terms, if you're worried about pests, what I found actually in my early research is that the insects had a strong preference for varieties of potatoes. So I was struggling with this one pest, the Colorado potato beetle. There was particular varieties that it greatly preferred. And that might be the way for slugs too. If they really love your romaine lettuce, but they don't really love the butterhead lettuce, then next year grow the butterhead lettuce.
Okay.
I think that's actually one thing, though, is to keep track, have a bit of a notebook, and to try to sort of do your reflections on each season, so you can remember those learnings. You always think, oh, I'll remember this for next year, and then next year comes and you're like, what was that? So to keep track which varieties are growing well, which ones you might be having more success with, and then for the next year you can remember that and build on that.
Okay, that's it. That's something I always forget to do. I always tell myself I will do it every year, and then I forget to keep a journal. So that's good advice, a good poke. Someone has asked a question about bringing nutrition back into the soil for next year. This goes back to, I suppose, the composting question. And someone else has asked a question about rabbit manure as a possible source of nutrition. Lots of manure options. Any suggestions? How do you bring nutrition back to the soil in the fall?
Well, as soil is like so wonderfully and such a beautifully complex ecosystem that as we know, we're only beginning to understand the biodiversity that lives in soil. I think some general principles are increasing organic matter. So you can, if you have a community garden you can lay down leaves or do a mulch and put them on in the winter and then turn them under. So you want to imagine that soil is living, and you want to make sure that you're trying to support diversity within your soil. So adding compost, green manures, cover crops, growing legumes, for example. They add, legumes are super cool. They fix nitrogen. They add nitrogen into the soil. So you can amend your soil with fertilizers that you would buy at a garden center. I generally suggest organic fertilizers, slow release fertilizers, but you can also do it through plants by planting specific varieties, and also by then adding organic debris.
Organic debris. So does the UBC Botanical Garden ever use manure?
Yes, for certain crops we use manure. I think it varies, and in some ways it's interesting. I don't know about rabbit manure. I've never worked with rabbit manure before. So I think what I've learned from the horticulturalists that I've worked with is that they all have their particular methods that they might that they might want to use. The different types of manure, their different techniques that they use. So we do use manure on certain beds, and I'm not currently sure which ones Linda is using the manure on them.
Okay, good. Question for you about the difference between food gardening and container gardening. So Metro Vancouver did a survey when we were putting together the Grow Green Guide. We found out that most of the people, well, a large percentage of the people that are gardening on a balcony or on a roof deck in containers. Container gardening is different than what I did when I was a kid in my grandma's garden. You know, we gardened in the backyard, in the soil. What are the key considerations for being successful when growing in containers?
Well, and I think most of my gardening, I've always had lived in small spaces. So most of my food gardening, besides my potato days, has been in containers. And so you want to imagine a container. The climate is different. We've raised the container in the soil, so all of a sudden, the containers generally heat up faster than growing in beds. The other thing, especially for urban residents interested in growing in containers, you want to think about drainage. So you have your plants in a pot, and you want to make sure that the pot at the bottom has a hole to allow the water to flow through. Most plants don't like to sit in water. They say they don't want to have their feet wet. Once you also want to think about if you're living in a busy apartment building, where that water is going. I generally put a shoe rack underneath my containers. A few years ago, I witnessed some infighting between some neighbors as she was watering all her containers, and the water all fell down on the container on the deck below. So just thinking about how water is going to move through your containers is really important. And lastly, in terms of containers, there's considerations. And again, Egan Davis, we wrote a great blog post on the Grow Green site, so you can go look at that if you're interested in learning more. But the soil is slightly different. You're using a potting soil in a container more so than soil from outside your terrestrial soil.
Okay. Someone has asked a question about intercropping. There's some other questions that I think we might have to respond to, like in emails after or in the chat box after. There's some kind of more technical questions, but someone has asked a question about intercropping, which leads me to my next question, which is, you know, next week we're celebrating World Biodiversity Day. And how can food gardens support biodiversity, and perhaps intercropping one of the ways that could happen?
Yeah, well, and biodiversity is my favorite topic. I think, and there's many reasons for that, but mainly I see biodiversity as helping us as our key tool for adapting to climate change and to building resilience. And so, I think intercropping is fascinating. And when I think about intercropping, a lot of people would do intercropping around sort of this companion planting idea, trying to deter insects. I've kind of think about it slightly different. I think about intercropping as a way of attracting pollinators. So what flowers can I grow between my vegetable plants to attract flowers? I also think of intercropping over time, because you might want to think about growing plants and how, as perhaps you might start with lettuce and you could intercrop with a slower growing plant, and that over a season, you might harvest one plant and then another plant will come through and grow up. So intercropping there's lots of different considerations. Some people say certain plants grow better together. So you can kind of find some of that online. I think it's great to trial that. I like to grow a lot of things. I used to jam a lot of things into certain containers, and you start to notice some things don't do well. And in theory, a lot of those plants, you can move them if you had to, if you were growing in a smaller space.
It sounds like it takes a bit of thought and pre-planning to get it all staged throughout the season. And I bet you love that, Tara. All that planning and thoughtfulness. Okay, we're coming close to the end of our time together. I would like to thank you, Tara, for being our first guest. Thank you so much for sharing your time and experience with us today. And I would like to thank the people that are on Facebook Live for joining us today. You can get more information about the Grow Green Guide at this website, growgreenguide.ca. Be sure to sign up for our blog, get news about what we're up to. And please join us for our next session, which is going to be next Friday, May 22nd at 12:30 on World Biodiversity Day. And our guest is going to be the fabulous Egan Davis, who is the principal instructor at the UBC Botanical Garden. He's going to tie his talk into the theme of biodiversity, and he's going to share with us how to plant a lawn alternative. So not your traditional turf lawn, but something that's a bit more biodiverse than that. And that will be next Friday at 12:30 p.m. For the people who we haven't gotten to your questions during the talk today, we'll be sending you responses. Don't give up on us. We'll be getting back to you. I think that's it for us today.